Welcome to the very first episode of the Anon Podcast. This is our platform to speak to the best and brightest minds in DeFi, NFTs, and cryptocurrency more broadly. Our first guest is building one of the most exciting DeFi protocols, Charm Finance. Charm has multiple products under its umbrella. The first product was an option service designed like a prediction market. Then they had leverage tokens, and most recently, Charm has introduced Uniswap trading strategies. On that note, I'd like to welcome one of Charm's co-founders, Tom. Nice to have you on here, Tom.
Thank you very much, Noodles. It's a pleasure to be the first guest on your podcast, and I'm looking forward to a very interesting discussion today.
Likewise. Speaking of firsts, Charm is notable in that they were one of the first protocols to design a fully on-chain options platform. So could you talk me through a little bit of the process on how you and Max started Charm?
Yes, sure. So me and Max have been friends for a number of years. So both of us are so satisfied with how finance is being run at the moment. There are lots of inefficiencies, there are a lot of red tapes, or it is very difficult for true innovations to surface very quickly. So basically, we've been brainstorming different ideas with one another for quite some time. While both of us are working on other projects. So one day, basically Max came to me. So this is a new options idea that I thought that he's had. And it just literally, I'm in love at first sight for me. To me, it's just one of the most simple and most beautiful concepts I've seen. So I just said yes to him immediately. So working on building this protocol together. So that was around September 2 years ago in 2000 and that was September last year. So basically, we spent about 4 months. So thinking about the protocol, thinking about the branding, thinking about how we can bring this to market, and then all of that efforts culminated in the launch of Charm on mainnet in January this year.
Thank you for that background. One of the most interesting things about Charm is the products that you and Max work on are quite technical if you dive into the kind of documentation around it, the sort of thought process around it, but the way it's presented in the Charm interface and the way it's built around the community is the process is entirely simplified for ordinary user to sort of pick up and dive into these products. So I'm curious about both of your backgrounds. So, I mean, it must take a technical mind to build such a technical product. Do you guys have extensive background in the finance or the engineering?
Yes, so across myself and Max, so we have maths, computer science, quantitative trading, and asset management. So that's from a technical side. There is a combination of both kind of mathematical and programming background. So it's mostly Max's background in doing the research as well as building the protocol. So for myself, I actually come from a medical background in addition to an asset management background. So that's why we're working on more of the community, so governance and token aspects of Charm, whilst Max is more focused on the research and the protocol building.
So you mentioned community is one of the core tenets of any DeFi protocol. Building a strong community. One of the challenges with building a community, especially in DeFi, is the pseudonymous environment. How do you think about building community while remaining pseudonymous as a team? And what do you think the challenges are?
Yeah, I guess first of all, building a community is just like building any other products. So you have to think about some ways in making your community unique. And above all, you have to be very genuine in really wanting to help members of your community. So that's why we've decided pretty much from day zero that the goal is to build an innovations community that can help anyone develop their ideas, products, and so it's this idea that this community is there to help others make their dreams happen and also to provide them with the resources and as well as other community members to work together to reach their goals. So I guess that's from the community aspects. We feel that this kind of very unique community that genuinely want to help others build their own product is something that is missing, and something that is missing in the DeFi space. So that's why we've kind of worked very hard in trying to build this community across all of our social media channels and as well as our media appearances with people like yourself. So that's from the community aspects. In terms of pseudo anonymity, I think this is quite an interesting thing because pseudo anonymity is great in the sense that it allows you to build a very powerful brand that is dissociated from how people normally perceive you in the real world. And we feel that's kind of incredibly powerful, especially when you're trying to build such a powerful community. I guess the real power of pseudo anonymity is that whenever people see your profile, they don't judge you by who you are, they judge you by the genuine value that you've created. So they judge you by how you have actually physically treated your community members. So that brand is entirely objective, basically. So that is something that can be instantly identifiable with with yourself the moment you have posted your pseudo anonymity brand so on the internet. So I think that's probably the biggest power of it, to be honest. I guess the downside for me for pseudo anonymity is it takes longer to build that. So for example, if you're a well-known figure within centralized finance, for example, the fact that of you having a profile photo using your real name will allow you to build instant. But I guess in the DeFi world, but I guess if you rely on pseudo anonymity with just a profile photo, no one is actually going to know who you are or what you do unless you've delivered some tangible value. And then that trust will take longer to build.
Definitely. I think you hit on one of the most important points about the pseudonymous community, where trust takes time. And in the non pseudonymous world, individuals are given trust by default because they share their public persona online. Whereas in the pseudonymous world, it takes time to build that trust. And then, one of the big criticisms of pseudonymous actors in DeFi is that they're more prone to rug scam like activities. But in practice, if you spend years of your life building trust in a pseudonymous environment, there's a lot more at stake for you than a non-pseudonymous individual who can sort of um, leverage their existing trust and make away with whatever rug pull that they've initiated. So I think you've brought up a really good point, but I want to touch on one thing specifically. You mentioned that Charm is a place where people can build their financial dreams. Who do you think in the crypto industry today, and I know there are a lot of big names out there who you can maybe refer to, but who do you think in the crypto industry today has enabled the most people to build their financial dreams?
So I would say that Yearn is doing a good job. Basically, it's really branding themselves in a very, very powerful way, in such a way that their fair launch was a really good message to send out to the community that Yearn is kind of community focused DeFi protocol. So they've actually done a lot of good work in encouraging, in making it kind of easier for others to kind of build strategies on top of Yearn. So I would say that Yearn is probably the best one that I can think of. I mean, in terms of really genuinely making it easier for others to build their financial dreams, not just from a protocol level, but also from a community support level, I can't think of that many similar protocols. So, I mean, that's why I feel that the Charm community is actually unique because we are really, really genuine, both from the product and as well as from the community development side to really help people who contribute their valuable time to find out more about Charm. So, I mean, that's me and Max, but just really love answering questions on the Charm Discord, whether big or small, because we really do want to make our community so an innovations platform in DeFi. So I really can't think of that many other similar communities apart from Yearn, which kind of actively made a real effort to really assist to make it easier for their community members to be a part of the protocol.
I think I would agree with you in that Yearn as far as decentralized protocols were to go, Yearn has built one of the strongest, if not the strongest community out there, and their fair launch plays a big in the centralized world. I would say Sam from FTX has done an incredible job at servicing customers pretty much 24/7. I don't think we see many people who stay awake as much as he does and cares about his customers as much as he does. Granted, there is a centralized financial model that backs FTX. Sam has shown customer service and customer support like nobody else that I've seen, and so I would like to give him some credit. It's interesting that you mentioned a fair. One of the hardest things is launching a token that is distributed fairly, because that involves no pre-mines, that involves fair access to everyone who are both big and small investors. How do you think about fair launches after Yearn, in a world after Yearn? Because Yearn had a particular advantage that not many protocols will have in the future, where Yearn was one of the first DeFi protocols to launch. So how do you think about that?
I think whether it's a fair launch or a non-fair launch, everyone will be faced with the same challenges in terms of how do you prevent centralization of power? Because even though Yearn is a fair launch, if you look at their token distributions, a lot of the Yearn is actually held by centralized parties. So it's quite unfortunate that the person who has made the most contribution to Yearn, Andre, actually doesn't hold that much Yearn tokens, which is kind of so really unfortunate consequence of the fair launch model. And I think Andre has also kind of spoken about this in quite a few of his blogs, so that if he were to start over again, he probably wouldn't have completely fair launch, so to speak. That's why I just feel now is that fair launch or no fair launch, one should really think very hard about concentration of power. Basically, how do you design your tokens emission schedule, or how do you design your incentive schedule, or how do you design your governance to make sure that you don't have a situations where one single holder holds 20% of the tokens because they are a huge whale within this ecosystem, because that can potentially kind of destate the protocol and defeats the purpose of decentralization.
Definitely. Incentivizing large whales to hold a majority of the tokens can cause attack vectors on governance. I think here, here's somewhat of a controversial question, and I want to know if you can answer it or not. Do you think there's been a lot of criticism in the past weeks and months on Uniswap's governance program, the concentration of wealth with large venture capital firms, the concentration of tokens within the team itself, and the large voting power delegated to a very few set of individuals? Do you think Uniswap is a sufficiently decentralized token?
I guess only time will tell. I mean, it may be perfectly possible that so even when you have centralization of power, then decentralization of these kind of centralized parties sufficiently understand the power of decentralization, so in order not to intentionally exert too much control or intentionally trying to manipulate governance. So I guess the answer is I'm not sure how decentralized Uniswap or other protocols will be 3 to 4 years down the line. There are some concerns around the community now around existing parties, so having too much power, and then they can then use that power to kind of to benefit the related parties. So I mean, to be honest, I don't know for facts behind, so I can't kind of comment specifically on the kind of particular scenarios over the past few weeks. So I guess just from a kind of purist perspective, so if you develop a protocol so that a large proportion of it is owned by early backers, for example, then it kind of introduces more for decentralization further down the line. So I guess that's probably perhaps what we're seeing with Uniswap recently. So I guess it's still early to say those parties have actually intended trying to influence their union's governance, so for their own purposes, for example. But the fact that a lot of people are asking these questions is a symptom of union's early design choices in having this being kind of more like a VC-backed model before so they release the tokens to the market. So basically, the short answer is I'm not sure, too early to tell. But the fact that a lot of union tokens are being held by a core group of people does introduce more risk and make it more difficult for decentralization.
You seem to be someone who's in the camp of progressive decentralization, where it may take a few years, but over time, Uniswap can become more and more decentralized, perhaps through delegation, perhaps through new distribution initiatives of Uni tokens, and perhaps through better treasury management. Now, the, the question that worries me is, in a couple of years, will there be enough tokens left in their treasury for Uniswap to become fully decentralized? Or by the time we reach that state, are the tokens mostly depleted and the treasury mostly depleted? But this segues us into an interesting point. Is there perhaps an alpha leak that you can share with us on how you're thinking about charms?
Yes, sure. So right from day zero, we want to be preparing for the day where Charm is 100% community owned and there wouldn't be any concentration of power. So that's right from the day zero. So that's why, from the protocol wise, Max has thought about decentralization and security with every single line of code he writes. So from a tokens perspective, we limit the number of private as much as possible, so that eventually, right, we will be able to control our own emission schedules. I mean, so that there will be the broadest possible ownership base. Because in the end, we don't really want to introduce excess risks to our decentralization path because that is something that we're fully committed to do. So we feel that the best way to manage that risk is to make sure that as much of our tokens, I can confirm that it's more than 60% of the token that will be allocated to the community by the time our tokens launch, which basically means that it's going to be one of the highest community allocations of any protocol. So our early investment round, right, we've only raised 5% of Charms tokens so from our investors. So that just goes to show kind of our commitment towards less concentration of power. So what this means is that if such a large proportion of the tokens will go to our community, then there are much more scope for you to design incentive schemes, much more scope for you to onboard contributors, liquidity mining schemes, for example. So in order to get as many people to own Charm tokens as possible, this is something that is very important to us.
I think it's a wonderful thought to have, to allocate 60% of your
So at least that amount, at least. So it will most likely be even higher.
So that's even better. So at the minimum, 60% will go directly to the community, and then a small portion will be allocated for other maybe team-related incentive activity or venture capital financing potentially. So when you think about the Charm protocol from a larger point of view, where do you how do you see growing the Charm team, and how do you see incentivizing future team members or open source contributors who may want to participate in the protocol, and how do you think you would incentivize those types of members?
Yeah, so the main way to do it is going to be through a Charm ecosystem fund. So because there will be a large amount of tokens allocated to be held by Charm Treasury prior to their distribution to the community, their ecosystem fund they will have a lot more. A lot larger pot of tokens in order to onboard contributors, basically. So the main mechanisms will be so that's why, right, we are currently working very hard on designing basically a series of job specs and then contribution specs to just decide on how the tokens can be distributed to contributors. So the contribution model we feel is perhaps the most important in preventing that concentration of power, because we are saying that you don't get given Charm tokens, you earn them. So the more contributions you make to the community, and actually the more tokens that you will earn. I don't mean that you're working for the Charm community. That's definitely not the case. What I mentioned at the very beginning, the goal of the Charm community, everyone realize their kind of financial dreams, realize their kind of products, ideas or services. The idea is the more that contribute to Charm community, the more resources this community will have to help you realize those dreams. The formal way in which people can do that, it will be through Charm governance, basically. So that's why there will also be lots of help and assistance on helping people write proposals, helping people generate ideas, helping people kind of find others to work on in relation to their products. You're already seeing some signs of that from our Discord community. When someone posts an idea, so there will be many people who are pitching in suggestions, and there are many people who are suggesting to others, please reach out to me if you want to build something together. So that's the early signs of what kind of our visions for the Charm communities is. Basically, we want this community to be a very friendly place where anyone can come to contribute ideas, and also to find business partners to work on those ideas with them. So it's kind of gives them a say. Also, it gives the community a say on how to allocate the funding within Charm Treasury in order to make the best ideas happen. So that's kind of our plans in a nutshell.
I really like that thought of making the Discord a place for collaboration. One of the ideas that you've talked about a lot is avoiding concentration of power. And this idea reoccurs throughout the centralized versus decentralized finance space. And so I want us to discuss regulations and centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges. So who do you think is the inevitable winner? Is it going to be decentralized exchanges that are fully regulated and fully compliant? Or are decentralized exchanges going to win? And are they going to enable new regulations for decentralized products from the ground up? How do you see regulation playing a part in the centralized crypto world and the decentralized crypto world?
So that's a great question. So regulations, I actually think regulations are really important, because I do come from a traditional finance background where it is like crazily regulated. So the interesting thing is that these regulations didn't come overnight. They came through like decades and decades of trial and error to get to where they are. So actually, if you kind of trace back to the history of finance, I mean, the finance of the days of JP Morgan, for example, John P. Morgan, I mean, many years ago, is not too different to DeFi right now. So in the sense that it is very much like a Wild West, basically. And then you get scams. It's very easy for people to manipulate the markets. And then slowly regulations came into force in order to protect consumers. But that process took like hundreds of years to get to where we are today. And I just feel like DeFi is kind of like where CeFi was maybe like 100 odd years ago. So my prediction is that regulation-wise, it will evolve in a very similar manner. So from a regulator's perspective, they have to be very careful in terms of over regulations, because the interesting thing about regulators is that they're often answerable to someone else, i.e. the government. So the worst thing that a regulator can be accused of is stifling innovation. So this is something, I guess, the old Wild West finance of 100 years ago. I mean, it didn't, the regulators of a CFI, I mean, hundreds of years ago, I didn't have to think too much about, because innovations doesn't really happen that fast in those times within finance. But right now, within DeFi, innovations happen so fast. With any economies, innovations is the most important driving force of progress. And the real danger here is that the regulators will take a heavy-handed approach, and then they will be accused of stifling innovation, and then the government, which basically runs the regulators, they wouldn't be very happy with them. So why, right, all the regulators you see around the world now, right, they're really playing, in my view, playing a very tough balancing act in how do you prevent all the abuse or the scandals with so within DeFi, why it's not hurting is the innovation spirit. So I guess just going back to your old question on kind of the differences between CFI and DeFi, I just feel that the biggest difference is the pace of innovation. Pace of innovations happens extremely slow in a CFI world, but that happens at lightning speed within DeFi. So it's probably doesn't surprise you that I do feel that unless this innovations is being has been stifled somewhat, that I'm optimistic about the future of a DeFi more than CFI. So I guess the real question is how much will regulators try to turn a DeFi into a CFI? So I guess that is the $1 billion answer that no one knows the answer to.
Definitely. I think it's very interesting to see how regulators will deal with a space that is innovating not on a monthly basis, but on a weekly, on a daily basis. There's new protocols, there's new developers around the world putting together smart contracts in ways we've never seen before. And in some cases, we don't even understand how to fully think about these ideas yet because they're so experimental. I'm curious to see which countries will be the most forward thinking in putting the right regulations in place to welcome innovation, because I think there is a large advantage to be gained for regulating intelligently, because that's where all the DeFi entrepreneurs, all the DeFi builders will go to. I mean, one great example of this is Singapore. Singapore has attracted a lot of talent, um, a lot of investment, because it's kept its mind open to new ideas, innovative concepts in the decentralized financial world. And it's, per capita, I can't quantify the number, but per capita, it has created a lot of wealth, at least based on my understanding, just from reading people tweet about Singapore. So it's interesting to hear you say that. One of the biggest challenges that's been popularly talked about right now is the idea of KYC in DeFi or KYC in crypto in general. I'm curious because this is an unanswered question, but do you see any way in which KYC can be implemented into a decentralized protocol?
I can't think of any straightforward way, to be honest, because DeFi protocol is based on so wallet addresses rather than a person's ID. So even though that you can KYC so wallet addresses, I mean, there's literally like millions and millions and millions out there. I mean, you can literally create a wallet addresses. Like I can create like 500 wallet addresses right now, basically. So are they really going to do 500 KYC on these wallet addresses to make sure it's me? So I mean, just from a resource perspective, if they're gonna do KYC on wallet addresses, which is probably the most realistic way of achieving full KYC for DeFi, then there simply wouldn't be enough resources. So although KYC is, I can see where the regulators come from. I can see in terms of kind of avoiding money laundering, for example. But I just, me personally, I just don't see how they can do it in practice. So worst case scenario, they're gonna ask some other intermediaries, and they're gonna ask like Coinbase, for example, to do KYC and on all of their wallets and users. And now, if they were to do that, then I feel that is grossly unfair. Because basically you're saying to the DeFi protocols, we don't have the resource, we can't be bothered to deal with this, so we're going to ask you to do it. So that's why I'm quite worried on the extent of the KYC regulations on DeFi, and then to what extent that the regulators will kind of mandate DeFi protocols to do KYC, because this is a hugely labor-intensive job. Basically, it's very simple, but due to the per user or per wallet, if you were gonna to do it on 10,000 millions of wallets, then no one's gonna have the capacity to do it. So that's why, right? I hope that there will be a sensible set of regulations. So in relation to requiring KYC, perhaps limited to kind of larger accounts, for example. So I still don't know how they're going to do it in practice. But I do feel that there will be some form of KYC further down the line, because there's going to be too much political pressures to protect consumers, especially when DeFi gets really big.
Definitely. As the industry grows, the more eyes will be on the industry and the more urgency there will be to track the people who are using these tools.
Yeah, that's right. So I think that regulations might not come as quickly as people think, because they have to get opinions from many different people. They have to do a cost to benefit analysis, do an impact analysis on what the regulations will mean for the industry. So and above, they will have to weigh the benefits of these regulations in protecting consumers versus innovation. So also don't forget that DeFi is not so big. There are a lot of kind of vested parties with very powerful lobbies who are invested in DeFi protocols. So which means if whenever the regulators want to do something, there will be a lot of discussions, back and forth, debates before they become finalized. So I do see this as an issue, but don't feel that it's an pressing concerns for DeFi protocols or anyone with a great idea right now, because new regulations take a long time to come out. Regulators want the same thing as everyone else, i.e., to promote innovation. So if you have a great idea, if you have a great contribution to make, just don't think too much about it. Just don't scam people, basically. So always acting in the best, thinking about your users, acting in the best interest, protecting users' funds. But if you have a great idea and innovation, just go out there and do it, because ultimately the regulators want the same thing, innovations-wise.
So your recommendation to the scammers is to not do it, and to the innovators to just do it.
Yeah, basically that's it. So I don't get scammers, and to be honest, I think the scammers are just the ultimate scum of the earth. To be honest, I mean, they're not really thinking about the long term at all. If they were to sit down and to learn about DeFi, to educate themselves, and then to think of kind of new ideas, which is so easy within DeFi, and then they put in all the hard work. I mean, they can make many times more compared to whatever the amount of scam that they've stolen off other people. I mean, the regulators actually do support the true innovators. So you'll eventually get to a day that even regulations and the government is supporting you. So you can get an even higher return on your investment. I mean, these scammers are just really lazy, ignorant people looking for the easy way out at the expense of others. So that's just it's just ridiculous.
It's very short-sighted, and it's just scumbag activity. And I'm glad to hear those words come from your mouth, because it gives me even more confidence in what Charm is building.
Yeah. So basically, right, these are short-sighted scumbags, right, who can't be bothered to do the legwork to do some to build something useful, basically. I mean, the even more annoying thing is that if you're so clever to do $10 million hack, for example, I mean, you're definitely clever enough to build a $1 million valuation DeFi protocol. I mean, definitely. So the reason why they don't do that is because it takes a lot of time, dedication, hard work, and effort, which they just can't be bothered to do. mean, just what a waste of talent and then what a waste of time. So that's just my opinion. So.
I never thought of it like that, but if you have that mental capacity to actually hack into something, you could just as well be the person to build it.
You can even build something new, even more powerful and incredible. So, and then you get the kudos, the recognition, the financial reward in a way that is a lot higher than any money you've stolen from others.
Absolutely. I mean, we are approaching the end of our time here, and I think this is a really great note for us to end on. It's good to hear your thoughts on the scams that run in this industry and how you, as a pseudonymous individual, think about these people. But I'd like to hear one last thing from you before we wrap up our conversation. What, in your opinion, based on your discussions with Max, is the future of Charm? What can we be excited for over the next 1 year, 2 years, 5 years?
Yeah, so within the next month or so, we're going to release our governance tokens. So that's something which will make it possible for the first time to allow kind of grassroots innovations from our community to happen. So we talked about before about this very unique community. So that is a way formalizing this unique community through our governance tokens. So I guess over the next year, so we're working on some very exciting partners. So Max is working on some really cool strategies. So for alpha votes. So and then so I look forward to so many more votes with more pairs. So and then for new ways for people to manage their vote holdings. So also version 2 of Charm options. I mean, so we haven't forgotten about options at all. So we also working on a Charm NFT strategies too. So with a view of potentially building out a Charm NFT product, which is a completely new way for people to think about NFT and its role in bringing people closer together. So that's what we'll be working on. So I guess over the next 2 years, we're gonna get closer and closer to our vision of building this truly unique community that act as the engine of growth for DeFi.
I'm looking forward to the broad spectrum of products that you are building. I will certainly be investing in the governance token that you release. Thank you for your time, Tom. I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, thank you very much, Noodles. It's an absolute pleasure to be on your podcast today.